Chapter 1, Introduction, Themes in the Study of Life, Concept 1.2, Evolution. This section meets the first course objective, which is to provide students with an introduction to the study of biology and major themes that unify this diverse science, including evolution, which is what we're going to be talking about today. At the end of this concept, I want you to be able to distinguish among the three domains of life and the eukaryotic kingdoms, and to know what the theory of evolution is and how it is the foundation of modern biology. To accomplish these objectives, we're going to talk about the theory of natural selection, or what is evolution, the effects of the theory of evolution, classifying the diversity of life, and the tree of life. So let's talk about what a theory is and what the theory of evolution is. A theory, among most of the population, means an idea that I'm going to try out. But to scientists, a theory is an idea that is supported by a lot of data and has predictive value. So basically the exact opposite of what most of us use when we say the word theory. That's confusing, yes, I know. So what is evolution? It is the theory that things change over time. That's it. That's probably not what you thought it was. We're going to talk about what the theory of natural selection or evolution is as we go through this concept. But you need to know that the theory of natural selection is the foundation of modern biology. All of what we understand currently is based on this idea of change of population of organisms over time. The theory of evolution was first proposed by Charles Darwin, and it explains how a vast, very diverse group of life, such as what we see on this planet, could change over time. So let's talk about the basic tenets of the theory of evolution, or the theory of natural selection. Individuals in a population vary in their traits, many of which seem to be heritable. So let's take we humans as an example. We are very different, even within the same family. At least my family is. And some of these differences pass on from mother to child, from father to child. Individuals in a population generally produce more offspring than the environment can support. This creates competition for resources. Think of it as a Black Friday sale. There's only 4 TVs that are at the fantastic rate, and everybody's shoving and fighting to get them. But instead of going after TVs, we're talking about grass or some other resource. There are also predators and disease. So some of these offspring will not survive to reproduce themselves. Those that do survive may pass traits that help them survive to their offspring, and their offspring have an edge. All of these results in populations of organisms becoming better adapted to their environment. Becoming better adapted to their environment can result in new species, a new group of animals or plants, and so on. So that's the theory of natural selection. So let's look at a theoretical example of how this would work. Suppose there are a population of insects of which there is a variation in the trait for pigmentation of the shell. So you've got very dark individuals, you've got sort of medium dark, we've got sort of light, and then we've got very light. Well, if they live in a dark environment, who's easiest for the predators to pick out? I know I'd have an easier time squashing these bugs. So over time, you have mainly dark bugs, and they are the ones left to survive, and their trait gets passed on. So the population becomes darker over time. You could see the reverse happening. If we were to change this to a light background, the light individuals would be favored. So this process can explain how fish can look so different. So here we've got a seahorse that just looks exactly like the coral that it lives in. And we have a trout that is the same color as the stream bed where this species is generally found. We have change over time in populations of fish in different environments so that they adapt to their individual environments. The theory of evolution is supported by a lot of evidence, and it explains what we see in the fossil record and what we see in molecular evidence. Let's take molecular evidence as an example. All organisms, from bacteria to trees to human beings, use the same genetic code. I can take the human insulin gene from one of my cells and put it in a yeast cell, and the yeast will make human insulin. In fact, that's how we make the insulin that is used by diabetics. The fact that all life, so far as we know, uses the same genetic code indicates that all life descended from one ancestor cell or population of ancestor cells that changed over time, resulting in the vast diversity of life that we see now. So, the theory of evolution is supported by evidence. Now let's talk about predictive value. For a long time there were no fossils that connected whales to land animals. But whales share more structures with land mammals than they do with fish, which is why they are classified with mammals. Some skeletal elements linked them to goats and cows, but there were no fossils. But the theory of evolution predicted that there had to have been mammals that were semi-aquatic, somewhat like seals. Then, about 10 or so years ago, scientists started finding intermediary fossils in the Saharan desert, which to my mind explains why we hadn't found them before. Who wants to dig there? Packing in all your water, drying up in the sun? Actually, I wouldn't want to dig in the Badlands of South Dakota, but you don't have to pack your water as far there. Anyway, the theory predicted that there were intermediary mammals, and there they are. Kind of cool, huh? There are benefits to the predictive value of the theory of evolution. Modern medicine is an example. Back in the bad old days, if you were cut through a major artery, you bled out. You died. No one had thought up the idea of taking blood from your fellow soldier and putting it into you. Then someone did come up with the idea. Well, it went badly. Some people did great, recovering well, and others developed fever and a rash and died. So blood transfusions were banned as a dangerous practice. Then, because of the theory of evolution, somebody got the bright idea of trying blood transfusions in a related non-human animal, specifically dogs. Well, the same thing happened, but the medical professionals of the time were able to discover that dogs had different types of blood. It's all red, but if you get the wrong one in your veins, your body goes nuts. Hey, if dogs have different types of blood, do humans? As you know, we do. Once we figured out blood typing, blood transfusions have become relatively safe and have saved billions of lives. No matter how you feel about animal testing, we wouldn't have that as an option without the theory of evolution, which predicts that mammals will have certain biochemical and physiological similarities because they were related. Personally, I prefer to try things out on humans before we move to human clinical trials. Before, they tried everything out on humans first. Really. Dr. Jenner and the development of the smallpox vaccine is a prime example. Jenner lived in the 1600s, a long time before Darwin and the theory of evolution. Smallpox was a real problem, and it would kill between 10 to 50% of the population when epidemics would sweep the area. The only good thing about smallpox was that if you survived it, you never got it again, unlike influenza and bloody diarrhea, to name a few lovelies that are still with us today. That led people to try all sorts of things to prevent to get smallpox the first time, like rubbing pus from smallpox into a scratch and hoping they survived it. The survival rate for those types of treatments was better, but not by much. Jenner noticed, though, that milkmaids who picked up cowpox as a part of their jobs didn't get smallpox, even if they hadn't had smallpox before, and no one was dying of cowpox. So Jenner thought, if I purposely gave someone cowpox, would that protect them from smallpox? Or do they have to be a milkmaid for that to work? So he did try this idea on a kid. Seriously. How many parents would volunteer their kid to try out a never-before-heard-of technology for preventing disease? I wouldn't. I would volunteer kids I didn't know for that job, which is what often happened. But thankfully for us, this process of taking pus from a cowpox and inoculating it into somebody else is where we get our first example of vaccination. Still, I'm glad that we do animal testing first. Moving right along, theory of evolution has been used to classify the diversity of life. We humans like to organize information into what makes sense. We really don't like chaos, and it's easier to study the diversity of life if it's organized. We organize living organisms based on shared characteristic. The idea being that those characteristics originally came from a common ancestor, like the genetic code and the blood types of mammals. Before the advent of molecular biology techniques, the characteristics we used were physical structures, like milk-producing glands, and feathers versus fur versus scales, and so on. Now that we have molecular biology techniques, we can use genes in organisms to determine relatedness. That's like using DNA rather than blood typing to figure out who the baby daddy is. Back before molecular biology techniques, that's what was used in paternity suits, blood typing. Now, there are a lot of guys with type A blood, but not many with the exact same DNA sequences as are found in half the baby's DNA. The other half of the DNA sequences having come from the mom. It makes sense to use DNA, and it's more accurate, and it clears up a lot of things. Which leads me to domains and eukaryotic kingdoms. Back in the good old days, we started with kingdoms. Now we have a grouping, or taxa, above kingdom, called a domain. So in order of descending order from biggest to smallest, the groupings, or taxa, are domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and finally species. For this course, we will be mainly dealing with domain, kingdom, genus, and species. Let's go over the domains and kingdoms. Domain bacteria is one of the prokaryotic domains. Here's a micrograph of some members of that domain. Prokaryotes are cells that don't have a nucleus. All organisms in domain bacteria are single-celled, do not have a nucleus or other membrane-bound organelles, and have peptidoglycan in their cell walls. Domain archaea is the other prokaryotic domain. Once upon a time, we put all organisms without a nucleus into one kingdom, Monera. But research into genetics of mud-dwelling, methane-producing bacteria revealed that some prokaryotes are no more related to other prokaryotes than they are to eukaryotes, or organisms that have a nucleus. That's why we created the domain classification. All archaea are single-celled, do not have a nucleus or other membrane-bound organelles, and do not have peptidoglycan in their cell walls. There are other differences between bacteria and archaea, but I won't make you learn them. The other domain is eukarya, or organisms that have a nucleus. You're quite familiar with some of the eukaryotic kingdoms, but let's go over all of their characteristics anyway. So everything below the line is in domain eukarya, but they're the different kingdoms under domain eukarya. Protists include eukaryotes that don't fit into the other eukaryotic kingdoms. So if you can't tell if it's a fungus or an animal, you toss it into kingdom Protista. Because of this, protists are a very diverse group. Genetic analysis is showing that some protists aren't very related, so more kingdoms are on the way. Currently, the defining characteristics of protists are no true cell wall, they have to be eukaryote, and most are single-celled. Next up is kingdom fungi. The book says that fungi are defined by getting their nutrients by absorption. I prefer a cell-based definition. Fungi are non-photosynthetic eukaryotes that have chitin in their cell walls. They can either be multicellular, like this mushroom and the mold that you sometimes find on your bread, or unicellular, like yeast. Plants are photosynthetic or have molecular evidence that they used to be photosynthetic. They are multicellular eukaryotes with cellulose in their cell walls. Lastly, animals are multicellular eukaryotes that lack a cell wall and ingest their food. So, I've gone over the characteristics of the domains and the eukarya kingdoms. There's a reason for that. Yes, you should memorize all of this because they will probably show up on an exam. Now, let's move on to how we organize things from domain on down to species. We tend to organize different species into trees, which show the relatedness of the current living species to each other. In this tree, you can see single branches coming off and branching off into other groups. So let's take this example here. So we have tree finches that are insect eaters and ground finches which are seed eaters. That preference has led to favoring of different beak shapes. You'll notice that the seed eaters all have broad, heavy beaks that are good for breaking open shells and other seed protections, whereas the insect-eating finches have a variety of shapes depending upon what kind of bugs they like to eat. The theory of evolution predicts that these ground-dwelling, seed-eating finches are going to be more closely related to each other than to the other finches in the Galapagos, and genetic analysis has borne this out. But genetic analysis has also shown that somewhere along the line there was an ancestral population of finches, and they split into these insect eaters and these seed eaters. So the insect eaters are more closely related to the seed eaters than they are to the warbler finches. Well, that's it for this concept. As a reminder, what I want you to know from this concept is to be able to distinguish among the three domains of life and between the eukaryotic kingdoms, and to know what the theory of evolution is and how it is the foundation of modern biology.